Okay, there we go. Got the connection up and running. Looks like. Oh, let's make sure that that is correct. Resize a few things. And I think that's actually ready to go. How nice. All right. We're just going to give it a couple seconds until we are ready to get going because you never know who's going to log in now that the live stream is up and the Zoom link is going. So I always like to make sure people have a chance to be able to come in. And need to get it to let me share my screen. Yes, that is the correct one. Go ahead. And that looks like it is working, I think. It's always a little bit of a delay, just making sure that everything has kicked in. And yes, we are in good shape. All right. Okay, so that should be everything ready to go. Happy New Year, everyone. Shana Tova for those that I haven't been able to talk with since the new year of 5785 began. It is wonderful to be back together again to study Torah almost from the beginning because of the way the Torah cycle worked out this year. We didn't get a chance to go over Bereshit together, but of course there's a lot in my back catalog and so much that's been discussed about that first parasha that I'm sure that you can study it. Even if you studied only it for the rest of your life, you'd still be finding new things. But we are going to move with the calendar, which means we are in Parashat Noach. And we're not going to talk about Noah. Again, Noah is a great topic, but we're going to talk about the second topic that comes up here near the end. The first topic near the end is, of course, the Tower of Babel. But we're going to talk about the story of Avram, or as he's better known, Abraham, once he gets his name change a little bit further on. It's amazing how many of the important characters within the story of Tanakh get those name changes. But let's go ahead and start with the beginning. So we are here at chapter 11, right up at the end of the book, the parasha of Noach, and we're going to pick up on verse 22 as we continue to follow the line of Shem, one of Noah's sons, and we see who his descendants are. And obviously, one of them is going to be very, very dear to our hearts. So, beginning with verse 22. Serug lived 30 years, and then he begat Nahor. Now, Nahor is, of course, the first one that's going to come into our mind of who this person is with connected to Abraham. And Serug lived after he begot Nahor 200 years, and he begot sons and daughters. Nahor lived 29 years, then he begot Terach. Now you'll notice that we had a big shift here. This is the first time that we are now seeing people who are coming into a more accustomed timescale. Prior to this point, the genealogies show people as being exceedingly old in a way that is very difficult to understand, although we have studied that together in the past. And now all of a sudden we have Nahor having children at the young age of 29, which is pretty young compared to the previous generations. Remembering that there were 10 generations prior to the flood, and now these are part of the 10 generations since the flood, which lead up to Abraham. And there is definitely a symmetry and definitely a changing nature of human existence. And this is one of those signs. Not our main focus today, though. On with verse 25. And Nahor lived after he begot Terach 19 years and 100 years, and he begot sons and daughters. Almost getting into a similar time frame again. Terach lived 70 years, and then he begot Avram, Nahor, and Haran. So we now get the three sons of Terach. Of course, Avram is going to be the one that is most important to us, and we can see him coming into the picture for the first time. Now, these are the begettings of Terach. All right, so we've talked about this before, but it's always good to remember whenever we get this Ve'ele Toldot, we are essentially saying that the Torah is about to describe a a sub-focus, a sub-emphasis on a particular character or theme that has been discussed. Although Fox translates it literally and correctly, that toldot means the begettings, the creating of new yeladim, coming from that same root for children. That doesn't mean that we're just going to be talking about the genealogy. After all, that's what we've been doing. Instead, it's going to take us a little deeper into what was important about this genealogy, which means we're going to see the who was married to who kind of thing, but we're also going to see a few narrative details that will be important. Now, these are the begetting of Terah. Terah begat Avram, Nahor, and Haran begot Lot. Now, Lot's going to be important much later in the story, so the Torah, of course, has to let us know where he came from at this point. And as you can see, he is the nephew of Avram, later known Abraham. Verse 28. Haran died in the living presence of Terah, his father. All right, now living presence. Fox, as usual, is trying to capture some of the feel of the text, although it doesn't actually say the word living. But al panei is very hard to translate literally in English and still have a sentence make sense. Al panei would be translated in the face of or in front of, but panei comes from the word for face. So what are we actually saying here? What we mean is that during Terach's lifetime, that Haran, his son, passed away. That is noticeable and something of importance. Now, it doesn't go into detail of how or why or what we are to make of that, but never fear. We are going to come back to that because the second half of the sentence is going to give us a little bit of a clue. And that this happened in the land of his kindred, in the land of the place of the creation of children. Molad Pao is going off that same route as Yeled, which you might know from basic Hebrew classes. And this was known as in Ur of the Chaldeans, or Ur Kasdim. Now, this Ur Kasdim doesn't get translated here in Fox's translation or in most translations, as it is a place names, and we do have a habit of not translating place names. For example, I grew up in San Diego, in a city known as La Mesa. I did not grow up in St. Diego town in the place of the table. We don't normally translate. We just use the proper name of a place as it is, regardless of what it means. But of course, our sages are not going to be just relaxed with a place name that seems to figure prominently in a narrative feature which goes without additional detail. And so they are assuming, quite rightly, that there is additional insight to be gleaned from this juxtaposition of Haran's passage, along with the name of the place, Ur Kasdim. So we are going to come back to that in some detail during our discussion. But for now, let's go ahead and finish up this section. Verse 29 continues, Avram and Nahor took themselves wives. They got married. The name of Avram's wife was Sarai. Remember, that's Sarah before she gets her name change. The name of Nahor's wife was Milcah, daughter of Haran, father of Milcah, and father of Yiscah. Now, those are going to be important because that is eventually going to be a continuation for Isaac and Jacob when they both go back to their hometown. Verse 30. Now, Sarai was barren. She had no child. Terach took Avram, his son, and Lot, son of Haran, who remember passed away, his son's son, and Sarai, his daughter-in-law, wife of Avram, his son. They set out together from Ur of the Chaldeans to go to the land of Canaan. But when they had come as far as Haran, they settled there. And this is Haran as opposed to a Haran. So it's one of those things that is harder sometimes to see in the English translations. Fox tries to give us a clue with the double R's, but still it should be the guttural chet at the beginning, Haran. And the days of Terach were 5 years and 200 years, and then Terach died in Haran. All right, so that is the end of our chapter, and then we are going to begin the next chapter with the call to Abraham specifically, famously called Lech Lecha, that he should go to the land of Israel. Well, it'll be called Canaan at that point, but of course it eventually becomes known as Israel to us. Now, as we can see, it was already Terach's plan to go to the land of Canaan, that was not something that was uniquely decided by Avram at the time, but instead it was his family's plan to go to Canaan. And it was only because of the passing of Terach that Avram went alone. At least that is what the text seems to be saying on this first read through, the Peshat understanding. So there's a lot to unpack here. We need to, first of all, figure out what is happening in this Ur of the Chaldeans, this land that gets named but not explained. We need to figure out exactly why Haran passes away in that place and what that implies for the journey onward to Canaan. So that's what we're going to be covering in more detail. But if someone has a quick question or comment they would like to share before we dive into that, then if you're in Zoom, you can unmute. If you're in YouTube, you can chat, type in the chat, and I will try to respond when you do. I know YouTube, there'll be a delay, so I'll keep coming back to that, and that's okay. I'll catch it up. I'll catch up to it whenever it pops up through the feed. Okay, so let's go ahead and review just a little bit because we need to have some of these words clear for us as we get into our commentary. That we have this gentleman Haran, who is the brother of Abraham. And I'm going to use the names Abraham and Avram interchangeably, simply because I know the name Abraham is more well known by most people. But remember that he is technically Avram at this time. And so Haran is his brother, and he passes away. That's very clear. And he passes away somehow in significance in relationship to his father. It could simply be that he passed away before his father, which is notable in the modern age, but would be slightly less notable in antiquity. Unfortunately, children did pass away very often, and so the passing of a child would not have been startling in the ancient world. So that leaves us unsatisfied as why it would be included. Surely Haran is not the only person to pass away before a parent, but nonetheless, we're going to come back and figure out why this is related. And we're also going to try and understand what this means of having this Ur Kasdim, this ancestral home of Ur Kasdim, Ur of the Chaldeans, and try and figure out what's going on there. So with that in mind, let's dive into our work. Now, what we have here is an extended commentary from Ramban. Again, that's Nachman, Rabbi Moshe ben Nachman. He is also known as Nachmanides in many other, what's the term, the Latinization of his name. So it's sometimes too hard to go through all of his commentary because he did write very extensively, meaning long commentaries rather than simple 2 sentences for a verse. But he often is a great summary. That is to say, he will draw in teachings from multiple sources and go through them systematically. And even where we might disagree with him, at least we have a comprehensive view of the issues on a given topic. And that's what we're really going to be using him for today. He is going to be our tour guide through some of the different ideas that come along. I should point out this is abridged. As always, please avail yourself either through Safaria or through the printed books of his entire commentary, because for the sake of time, I couldn't include everything that he had to say, even on this one section. So, in accordance with the words of our rabbis, whenever Ramban and most of the other sages are using the term rabbis, they actually mean capital S sages, the Chachamim, or Chazal, as they are often called in abbreviated form. These are the rabbis of the earliest generations, meaning from the Mishnah period and the Talmud period, also the period of the earliest layers of Midrash. So if you see a name like Hillel or Shammai or Rabbi Yochanan or Reish Lakish, those are the rabbis, those are the sages, the Chachamim, the sages literally, or Chazal. meaning the sages, may their memory be a blessing. It's an acronym. And that's what we're talking about. This is not just the people who lived in the generation before Rashi or before Ramban. These are the very earliest authors whose works we have to help us journey through these topics. So he's admitting, acknowledging, raising for our consideration the fact that what Rashi is about to tell us is based upon the words of those earliest sages. There are many in the modern world who will shy away from wrestling, debating, questioning the words of those earliest sages. Our ancestors, all the way up until the pre-modern period, had no problem raising questions or doubts on different points. They were not trying to overthrow the words of the sages, but they did feel that they required a great deal of investigation. And they also recognized that the sages themselves were not monolithic in their interpretation of text, and therefore we needed to study carefully to understand which of the opinions were the ones that were most worthy to hold on to. Okay, so what does Rashi bring in the name of the sages? Terach accused his son Avram before Nimrod of having broken his idols, and he cast him into a fiery furnace. Meanwhile, ... We'll come back to that. So Rashi is giving a summary of one of the most famous midrashim of all time about Abraham. And we've gone over this midrash in more detail, so I'm not going to go into it extensively here. But for those who haven't come across this midrash yet, the midrash basically says, why did God pick Abraham? Why, out of all of the people of the world, did God look at this guy here in the middle of Anatolia and say, you are going to be the father of a nation? Well, the Midrash basically says that Abraham, as a child, could recognize the stupidity of idolatry, and that he tried to prove this to his father by smashing all the idols in the father's idol shop, and then putting the club in the hand of the biggest idol. And when his father asked him what had happened, he said, oh, the big idol smashed all the other idols. And his father said, what do you think, I'm stupid? At which point, young Abraham said, well, if you worship idols and you don't believe they can even defend themselves, why do you think they can defend you? His father, in the tradition of bad fathers throughout history, did not take this insight well and decided to bring him to the local authority for his heresy against idolatry. The local authority being Nimrod, who was considered to be king in that area at that time. Nimrod could not shake Abraham from his belief in one God, in Adonai, and as such, to test his faith, he threw him into a fiery furnace. And Abraham's going to survive, but his brother Haran doesn't know what's going to happen. Meanwhile, Haran waited while Abraham's in the furnace and said to himself, if Avram proves triumphant, I will be on his side. And if Nimrod wins, meaning his brother dies, I shall be on his. So basically, Haran is going to hedge his bets. He's not going to say, yay, Abraham, until he sees Abraham successfully exit the furnace. And he's not going to say, yay, Nimrod, until Abraham dies, at which point he knows Nimrod was right. He's waiting for the final proof before he casts his vote. Now, when Avram was saved, they said to Haran, on whose side are you? He replied, I am on Avram's side. All right, so Haran, seeing that God had saved Abraham, decided to throw his lot in with Abraham. I mean, come on, that's the winning side, obviously. And so when they asked him, well, then do you support Abraham or not? And he said, yes, that is what we probably consider to be a rational decision. They therefore cast him into the fiery furnace, because now that he's thrown his allegiance in behind Abraham, it turns out the powers that be are not interested in what is right, but are interested in protecting their authority. As such, they were willing to throw him in, and he was burnt to death. Now, why was he burnt and Abraham was not? Well, because Abraham's faith preceded the proof, preceded this evidence, and Abraham was not vacillating, was not ambiguous in whether or not he truly believed in God. He wasn't just trying to pick the winning side, he was picking the side that he truly believed to be right. Haran was not, and a miracle wasn't going to happen for a person like that. Haran was therefore executed by Nimrod and the people of that city. Now, what does this have to do with our topic? It is to this event that the name Ur-Kasdim, fire of the Chaldees or the Chaldeans, translating the word Ur as fire, alludes. Menachem ben Saruk, however, explained a different interpretation, that the word Ur as meaning valley. How does he prove that? Well, if we look into Isaiah, therefore glorify the eternal Ba'urim. Now, how are we going to translate the phrase Ba'urim in that passage? Well, says many people, it should be translated as in the valleys. You will note, if you're quickly flipping through your Tanakh, your Bibles, that other will translate this as with fire or with light. And that is because it is a point of debate of how to translate that word. Menachem ben Saruk, however, thought it should be translated as valley. And indeed, he also felt that in chapter 11 of Isaiah, where it says Me'urat, meaning the den of the adder, that this also was best translated as a type of hole. And every hole or deep cleft, therefore, can be called Ur. This matter received by our rabbis through tradition is the truth, and I will elucidate it. This is the words of Ramban. Now, what you see first is that Rashi is bringing two opinions. He is bringing the rabbinic midrash, the rabbinic explanation, that it was called Ur-Kasdim because it was referring to the fire of the Chaldeans, because it was that fire that killed Haran, which at the beginning of the verse, like we saw, oh, where did my mouse go? Come on. There we go. Sorry. As we saw, it says that Haran dies before his father. So what is happening here? Says the Midrash, the father was accusing Avram of being a heretic, and so we entered into the fiery furnace test, and after Avram survived, Haran was thrown in, and there, to the shock of his father, in front of his father, he was killed. Where? In the fire of the Kasdims. So in that fire of the Chaldeans. So the Midrash is trying to turn this sentence from being a two-dimensional genealogical footnote into being an actual narrative of explaining not only why Haran died, but why his death was significant in the journey of Avram and the journey of monotheism. And Rashi, having brought that by the sages, then still feels the need to bring Menachem ben Saruk's opinion that has nothing to do with fire whatsoever, and we're just talking about it being the Valley of the Chaldeans. Now, why does Rashi do that? Well, that's a whole other conversation, but what it implies, and what it implies especially to Ramban, to Nachmanides, is that Rashi was unsure of the interpretation that Ur-Kasdim really means the fire of the Chaldeans, and thus the furnace story maybe also wasn't 100% established. But Ramban is going to try and salvage the idea of Ur meaning fire more than the others, more than the other translations, and sort of restore that interpretation fully. Ramban often will disagree with Rashi. Here he is agreeing with him, but he is trying to buttress Rashi's initial opinion against the second opinion that Rashi chose. Okay. So let's talk a little bit here about this place of Chaldea and what's going on and the miracle that's happening, pointing out that Avram was not born in the land of Chaldea, which is an important concept because it does say that this was the land of Moladeto, in the land of his kindred, in the land of the place where the children were being made. So what's going on? Well, that's part that I had to clip out. It's a fascinating discussion, but it goes on for about a whole nother page where he tries to explain that. So again, check out Sefaria or a good book on Nachmanides, and you can read the commentary in its full. But he eventually comes back to, in any case, it was in this place, the land of Chaldea, that a miracle, or more exactly a hidden miracle, was done to our father Abraham, for God put it into the heart of the king to save him and not kill him, and so he released him from prison to go where he desires. It may be that it was an overt miracle, that is to say that the king threw him into a fiery furnace, and he was saved, as our rabbis have stated. Okay, so is Ramban saying there was a miracle or not a miracle? Well, this is where we get into a flaw in modern thinking about miracles. What Ramban is saying is that there was a miracle. The shape of the miracle, the video version of the video, the journalistic account of the miracle, could come in two forms. It could come in the classical fiery furnace, giant flames, Abraham being thrown into it, and then coming out of it. That could be the way that this all happened journalistically. Or it could be that all of this was rather prosaic, boring, dull, but incredibly important and exciting to the people going through it, where Avram would have been thrown into prison, where he would have been taken away from his family because of his heresy, and his life would have been hanging by a thread. And instead of executing him, the king decided to free him. Now, is that less of a miracle? Not according to our ancestors and our sages and all of our great commentators. In the modern world, I know people want the Hollywood miracles, and anything less than that, they just, it's frustrating. But I will point out that that attitude is exactly what got Haran into trouble, that he was waiting to see with incontrovertible proof that he had decided in his own mind what shape that proof needed to come in. And so he wanted to see his brother come out of that fiery furnace. And when he didn't, when he did, now he believes that's not a great attitude. So instead, what we have here is two different ways of looking at it. Now, Ramban is going to come back to the fiery version, but he is entertaining for the moment and seems perfectly at peace with the idea that this may have been a miracle where the king simply behaved in a way that was uncharacteristic for a king in the ancient world. To have somebody accused of public heresy and destruction of religious artifacts, to allow such a person to go free without punishment would be shocking and surprising. It would be miraculous. That kind of pardon is not expected. So that is where he is going. But we do need to come back to this fiery question. But before we get to that, he also wants to talk about why that story in the Midrash is not written extensively, in the Torah itself. This is something that often confuses people, where they look for a Midrash in the Torah text, they don't find it, and then they think it was just made up. Well, Ramban has an explanation for that. Let not Rabbi Abraham ibn Ezra, another very famous commentator, mislead you with his questions. Ramban often criticizes Ibn Ezra, saying that scripture has not narrated this wonder, for I will yet give you a reason for the omission and proof of the verity of this and other miracles like it. So he says, look, yes, it is not clearly written in a long paragraph narrative form, but that doesn't mean it's not there, and that doesn't mean it didn't happen. And you shouldn't wonder why it wasn't narrated in the way that we were hoping for, again, in the Haran attitude. These people, however, did not mention it in their books because they differed with this, meaning the patriarch's opinion, and they thought his miracle was a deed of sorcery, just as was the case with our teacher Moses in his confrontation with the Egyptians at the beginning of his deeds. So he says, yes, other people who would have seen the event between Nimrod and Avraham would not have chalked up Avraham's success to God. They would have said, Avraham clearly must be some kind of magician, because people believed in magic like that, and it was easier for them to believe in magic than it was for them to believe in God. One of the fundamental problems of humanity for the last 10,000 plus years. So Avraham story would not have been widely publicized because it would have been discounted as being just normal magic and thus not significant. It is on account of this that scripture no longer mentions the miracle of Abraham, for it would have had to mention the words of those who differed with him, meaning his opponents, as it mentioned the words of the Egyptian magicians, meaning when they were fighting with Moses. And Abraham's words were not as openly verified to them as were ultimately the words of our teacher Moses, which were established by 10 clearly revealed miracles known as the plagues. So Moses' story and his debate with the magicians gets recounted, because eventually it is incontrovertible. What was actually taking place was being done by God rather than by magic of the ancient world. Abraham, on the other hand, had this one incident, and for the people that he was involved with, there was never any full resolution. So even the whole fiery furnace thing, if that was exactly what happened in that literal kind of description, that would not have convinced them. And as such, we would have left it as a hanging question. There are some who say this and some who say that, moving on. And that's not where we want to leave it. We want to leave it with Abraham being secure and others having recognized it. Lacking that recognition, the Torah was loath to include the opinions of people who were never fully persuaded, because that is not the kind of story that the Torah was trying to tell. So a little significant editing. After all, the Torah cannot recount every single deed of each of the people, but does so very carefully to create the overall interpretation. So let's go back to our question of fire and miracles and such, of what was actually happening here. So thus, Scripture, the Torah says, I am the Eternal that brought you out of the Ur of the Chaldees to give you the land to inherit, coming up in Genesis 15. For the word hotzetcha, brought you out, points to a miracle. Why does it do that? Well, because it does not say that took you out. Hotzetcha is talking about the afsa, the root verb meaning to exit, and it is coming in the form of what we call a causative, meaning that God caused Abraham to leave, caused Abraham to exit. It's the same root that we use for Egypt, as we're going to see, Yetziat Mitzrayim. And that has a connotation of being brought out, of being pushed through the door, if you will, as opposed to taking out, which would have been a different root, which we'll come back to later, from lakach. So instead it says brought out, meaning that he, God, brought out a prisoner from the dungeon, just as in the verse that brought you out from the land of Egypt. The common verse that's used multiple times to describe our exiting from the land of Egypt, the Exodus, in fact, which is even captured in the English. And he said to Abraham to give this land to inherit it, from continuing of that part of Genesis, because from the time that God brought him out of Ur of the Chaldees, it was his will, exalted be he, to make him into a great nation and to give him this land of Canaan. So it was already the intention that was what was going to be the final result, if you will. And so he is being brought out of that crisis, of that prisoner, that dungeon status, bondage, and then is doing so in order that he can take possession of the land of Canaan in order to build the Jewish people, which continues to this day. So as we continue to read in Ramban, from that day on which Abraham was saved, Terach, his father, and Abraham had in mind to go to the land of Canaan, as we saw in our text, a distant point far from the land of Chaldea, out of fear of the king, since Haran was near them, meaning the Chaldeans. So they wanted to move to Canaan because Haran was still way too close. Now, this is, and they were one people with one language, since Aramaic was their common language. Now, this is an interesting point because there are many debates about exactly where was Ur. Many people will point to an area in southern Baghdad, southern Babylon, far south of where Baghdad is, close to Kuwait or Basra in the modern day Middle East. Others, however, argue that Ur is in fact up in Turkey, and it is much closer then to Haran, which seems to be the opinion here of Ramban and other sages. So we can debate and discuss that, exactly what's going on here. But Ramban is saying that Chaldea and Haran were neighbors, and thus Haran wasn't far enough for Terach and for Abraham. They wanted to go further away from the king because, well, they just lost their brother. Abraham had already been thrown in prison once. It was likely going to cause problems again. probably best to leave. And why was the language important? Well, they wanted to go to a nation where their speech would not be understood by that king and his people. Sometimes it's helpful when the powers that be that might persecute you don't know what you're saying. So moving down into Canaan was going to be helpful, as it would give them a little more safety to worship as they want, to be as they want. So carrying on, this is the meaning then of the verse, and they went forth with them from Ur of the Chaldees to go into the land of Canaan, and they came into Haran, where their families and ancestors ever lived, and they settled among them, staying there for many days. It was there that Abraham was commanded to do what he had intended, meaning to go to the land of Canaan. So that is where the Lech Lecha call comes. So they make it to Haran, which is just south of Ur by many opinions. And at that point, God says to Abraham, more specifically, you're on the right track. You do need to go. Come on, right to Canaan. And at that point, Abraham leaves his father, who later died there in Haran, his country, meaning the country of Terach, and went with his wife and Lot, his brother's son, to the land of Canaan. Thus, scripture says from the book of Joshua, and I took your father Abraham from beyond the river and led him throughout all the land of Canaan. So out of Ur, it was being brought in that Exodus kind of saving from prison way. Out of Haran is being taken to go. For Abraham was commanded concerning this when he was yet beyond the river, meaning in that region. And from there, God took him and led him throughout all the land of Canaan. So what we see is that there was multiple stages in Abraham's journey. That we had the incident in Chaldea, and then we had the calling up in Haran, and then his eventual settling in the land of Canaan, which of course we'll be talking about for a while because it dominates the next few Torah portions. Now, according to the opinions of our rabbis, that Nimrod threw Abraham into a fiery furnace, the name Ur Kasdim will be understood as the plain meaning indicates, that is to say, the fire of the Chaldees. Now, what we're going to come back to here was that question of, was there actually fire involved in the conflict between Nimrod and Abraham or not? Was it just that he ran afoul of the powers that be and they threw him in prison, but eventually miraculously allowed him to leave? Or was there actually a fiery showdown? Well, that was left slightly ambiguous in Rashi. Ramban is now finally doubling back and answering that question. And he is going to come down on the side of fire, that indeed there was a fire that took place. Why? Because we have in that same expression, I am warm, I have seen the Ur, we have a usage of the word Ur meaning fire. Indeed, this is not unusual at all. Scripture thus says, they went forth with them from Ur of the Chaldees. I need to explain that because how can they go? Terach wasn't in the fire, was he? Well, even though Terach did not go forth from the fiery furnace, however, it is since Abram is the main, meaning that sometimes the Torah will use a collective noun, a they in this case, for something that involved only one person in the they, but that one person is the main person in the story, and therefore we'll talk about that one person's effect even though we're using the collective verbs and pronouns. I know that sounds a little strange, but we do it all the time. So, if we say they went to a conference and she was the main speaker, at the conference, then we might be talking about the husband and wife, but clearly the wife was the main person. But we're not going to say she went to the conference because, well, he was there too. But we are going to talk about the part that she played more than his because she was the primary attendee. So we do this kind of thing in other languages all the time. We just don't think about our own language very much, which is very evident by how people talk and the mistakes they make in their communication daily. So it may be that on account of the miracle, the place came to be so called, just as we find at Taberah and at Massa and Kibbot Hata'ava and others. So maybe even it was called Ur because of the fire and the incident with Avram, and that became its official name. Not necessarily that we're nicknaming it Ur because of the fiery furnace, but that may actually have been its eventual name because of the fiery furnace, a sort of chicken and egg. Scripture thus alludes that when Avram went forth from the fiery furnace, they all fled from that country. Now, we have to come back because we did see in the beginning of our commentary that there is another opinion that this Ur could mean a valley, could mean a cleft. And Ramban, like I said, is thorough. That's why his comments are so long, for which we should be grateful, because we don't have to read between the lines, because he gives us all the lines. So he wants to come back and deal with that question as well. So in the meaning of the verse, glorify the eternal Ba'urim, which in the earlier version we were reading as in the valleys, is in my opinion consonant with that with which the rabbis have said concerning Ur Kasdim, that it means fire of the Chaldees, for Urim are the high mountains on which they make fires and kindle the flares to make the new events known quickly in distant places. Even as it says in the rest of that verse, in the isles of men, in the name of the eternal, the God of Israel. Again, we're in Isaiah 24 here. So what he is saying is that rather than thinking of Ur as being a valley, we can actually use the term Urim as mountains upon which signal fires were lit, which means they were called Ur because of the fires that were on top of those mountains. And that this was one of the ways that we would disseminate news, in particular the announcement of a new month, which allows people to calculate holidays and the like, by lighting signal fires from place to place to place. Those of you who have seen the modern film of Lord of the Rings will know in Return of the King that we get that beautiful shot of the fire being spread from mountain to mountain as a signal. So, in the sense that the verse is thus that for the glory of God, they should let the whole world know the miracle and the wonder which had been done to them, meaning light the fires up on those mountains, show the world all the way across, even to the distant islands, God's wonder. So, Ba'urim doesn't have to mean valleys. It can mean these signal fire mountains. So also, Me'urat, the adder, means this serpent's hole, where his fire and great heat are. Just as he is indeed called a saraf, meaning a serpent, but literally saraf means the burning one, taken from the incident of the bronze serpent in the time of our wandering in the desert. So serpents can be called fiery things because they cause a burning through their venom, and as such, when we see this me'urat, it doesn't have to mean a crevice or hole. It can mean the fiery place, meaning the serpent's den, the adder's home, because that's a fiery place, not with actual licking flames, but with the heat of the venom of the animal. Therefore, and I have seen, skip the line, I have seen in the Midrash and Pesika Rav Kahana, arise, Uri, right? Arise and shine, Isaiah 60. Therefore, glorify the eternal Ba'urim. How do we glorify him? Rabbi Yevo Bar Kahana said, with these torches, such as the lanterns which burn in synagogues in all places, even in the isles of the sea, to the glory of God. So this is a midrash, which is taking that beautiful phrase from Isaiah of arise and shine, Uri, give light, that this is a way of glorifying God with this fire, with this shininess. But how specifically do we fire this up? Well, we have torches and lanterns that are kept in a synagogue every place that you go. And indeed, this is a custom that we have until this day. One of the signature features you will find in any set place of prayer is a ner tamid, is a fire that is always going. Our ner tamid is usually right over the Aron HaKodesh. If you ever see something on our live stream or come to our congregation, you'll see the light that burns right over the top of the Torah's ark. And what is being hinted at here is that this is not just a reminder of the menorah that was kept lit in the times of the temple, but that this is also reminiscent of this notion of Isaiah 60, of shining out for God. But we can also now see this as being a reminder of the act of Abraham, that this is the fire in all of those ways, that this is the fire of extolling and praising God. And this is also the fire of having faith in God, because that is the ultimate praise. To say that I believe in God to the point of a fiery furnace like Abraham is the greatest statement that we can make regarding our understanding of what God means to us and to this world. And so when we see that Ner Tamid, it's not just an incidental piece of synagogue architecture. That is a reminder of the power of our faith in God that goes all the way back to this earliest incident with Avraham publicly making known that indeed, despite the wishes of the world around him and the dangers that it poses, that he believes in God and he is willing to risk everything for that. Very important thing, I believe, to continue to remember in every generation, certainly for many people over the last year who have been shaken by many of the events, are unsure of exactly how publicly or proudly they should stand out as Jews. Well, we can look to no better example than Avram, because Abraham was a single voice in an entire world, and he suffered greatly for that. And yet, thanks to what he did, the entire world has benefited. Not only our people, but billions of other people have benefited from the light that he brought into the world thanks to his courage. So when you see that light burning in a synagogue, when you consider the light that you need to shine as well, bear that in mind. It doesn't always seem worth it. I certainly understand that feeling, and sometimes feels like we are attacked for daring to light a light at all. But it is something that the world will continue to benefit from, and in the long term, light will shine and light will win. With that, we will finish for today, unless there are any last-minute questions. I'm not seeing any. Just give one more second there. So we will go ahead and wrap that up. As always, people are more than welcome to either email me or call me, and we can discuss things in more detail. But for now, I will wish everybody a wonderful day. Keep studying, and I will see you next week.